Okay, so let's look at some at I and some powers of I. So we're just going to use the properties of I that we know to evaluate some powers of I. And I want you to notice that there is a pattern. Let's see if you can see what the pattern is. So I to the first is I. Okay, we get that. I squared, well, you know what that is. That's -1. I cubed, well, that would be I squared times I to the first, right? Because you have now 3 i's here, don't you? And of course, we know what I squared is. That's -1. So we get -I. So I to the third gives us -I. Okay, what about I to the fourth? Well, I to the fourth is I squared squared, right? So that's -1 squared, which is 1. Okay, well, that looks good. All right, so then what about I to the fifth? Well, I to the fifth is I to the fourth times I, isn't it? I to the first, right? And I to the fourth, we just found that. That was 1. So this is I. Okay, and then what about I to the sixth? Well, that's I squared cubed, which is -1 cubed, which is -1. All right, and then what about I to the seventh? Well, that is going to be I to the sixth times I to the 1. And we just said I to the sixth is -1, so that is -I. And then I to the eighth is I squared to the fourth power, which is -1 to the fourth, which is 1. And so can you see that this is cycling through? And it will. So I bet you can tell me that I to the ninth is I. And I to the 10th is -1. And I to the 11th is -I. And I to the 12th is 1. And so on. So now we want to be able to get to one of these 4 answers. So any power of I will be one of these 4 answers. It'll either be positive I, -I, +1, or -1. So we just want to be able to figure out which one it is depending on what power it is, right? So let's look at some examples. Okay, so the first one is I to the 70th. And of course, we don't want to keep just making a list till we get to I to the 70th. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to use some of the, we're going to use the fact that we know that I to the 70th is I squared raised to the 35th power, right? Okay, so we have 70 i's over here, and we're going to group them in 2's, and we want to know how many groups of I squares can we make. And so there's 35 groups, right? Notice that's what you would get if you take 70 and divide by 2, right? So then you're going to replace I squared with -1. -1 to the 35. Okay, and then we know that if we take a -1 to an odd power, that always gives us -1. So I to the 70th is -1. Okay, let's go to I to the 55th. All right, so think about this. If we can make, how many groups of I squares can we make in 55? There's 55 i's, right? So we can take 54 of those i's, because that's an even number, and separate them in 2's. And with 54, that would mean that we would have 27, right? We would have 27 I square groups. And that gives us what? Well, that gives us 54 i's, but we have 55. So that means we've got 1 leftover I to the first power, right? Okay, and then we know that this I squared here gives us a -1. So we have I squared, we're going to replace that I squared with a negative 1. We have 27 of those, right? Times this other extra little I that's here on its own. So negative 1 to the 27th, a negative 1 to an odd power is negative 1, and negative 1 times I is negative I. I'm going to show you a different method and see if you like this. So some students like looking for I squared, like we did in examples 1 and 2, and then some students like looking for I to the 4th. Now, why do you think we're looking for I to the 4th? Well, let me remind you, I to the 4th is I squared squared, right? Which is negative 1 squared, which is a 1. So we know that every multiple of 4, if we can break this up into groups of 4 i's, those 4 i's would multiply to 1. So here we have 37 i's. How many groups of 4 i's can we make? Well, we can make 9. Right? That'll give us that'll use up 36 of our i's. And that means that we have 1 leftover I. Okay, but now we just remembered here that I to the 4th, this I to the 4th is 1. And 1 to the 9th is just 1. And so here we have I. So I to the 37th can reduce to I, right? Can simplify to I. Okay. All right, I to the 48th. Oh, I'm liking this, aren't you? Why? Because how many I to the 4ths can we fit in 48? There are 12 groups. And each of these 4 i's multiply to a 1. I to the 4th is 1, and so 1 to the 12th is 1. So I to the 40th is 1. So you can use either method. You can either look for the I squares, like we did in example 1 and 2, or you can look for groups of 4 i's, I to the 4th, remembering that those are equal to positive 1, and use that information to simplify.